Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, I feel like I need to talk about, or I would like to at least talk about, the incident that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of by now, although maybe not, because it seems to be purposely or coincidentally being underreported, and what is being reported is not good, I guess, for lack of better words. The train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. So if you have not heard about this, essentially, to get caught up super fast, a train that was carrying question mark a train that was carrying a lot of chemicals that are known, the chemicals that we know of that were on the train are known carcinogens, debated carcinogens, and other toxic chemicals. Now, I say that we know of because there's been a lot of, there's been a lot of, or not a lot of, information about specifically what was on the train being given out. And a lot of the controversy that has surrounded this incident is the way that a lot of this is unfolded. So there is certainly a manifest of everything that existed on this train. The rail company has it. They know what they were moving. They have that. But only certain chemicals have been publicly acknowledged. So there's that. Then there was an arrest at a press conference. So, well, first, the press conference started 2 hours late, which press conference started late. I'm, whatever. But 2 hours late would indicate that perhaps they were waiting for a piece of information to be acquired, like testing or something of that nature, to be able to say, hey, everything is totally fine. It's the end. So there was a 2 hour delay in the start of this thing. And then when it started, a news correspondent got arrested for criminal trespassing for being at the press conference. Another weird thing. And no one is talking about it. Like, mainstream media is just not talking about it. And, that to me at least indicates that it is bad. So, if it's not being talked about at all, it's bad. If it's being downplayed, it's really bad. And both of those things are happening. It's not being talked about at all until it is being talked about because of other weird things that have been going on related to it. And then it's being downplayed. So it's kind of a super brief, not the most specific, catch up of kind of what's been going on. So it's in the town is in East Palestine, Ohio, is where this all happened. And that's on the eastern side of Ohio, bordering Pennsylvania. It's about 40 minutes, an hour or so, northwest of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. So it's in that general vicinity of the country. So this train derailed, currently still needs to be verified, by me at least. I've heard a lot of stuff, I guess. So things that I have heard that have not been verified, everything I've told you so far is verified, is that there's now this evidence that the train was on fire before it derailed. And that it was moving while it was on fire, and that it might have been derailed purposefully, or the incident might have purposely happened because closer to a town where it would be easier to access and therefore cheaper to clean up. This is what I've heard a lot of like this. So there's a lot of stuff going on related to this incident that is just like not adding up. And the main thing that I want to talk about is, so like, it's super easy to sound like conspiratorial when you're talking about a thing happening and then there's like a cover up of it. It's really easy to like fall into like conspiracy, but a thing happened that is proof that something is not happening correctly. So the final confirmed thing to mention is that it was basically like, how do I say? People were told that it was fine, it was over, it's like not a hazard anymore after being evacuated and being told that like it's life or death, get out now. All the alarms sounding and, people being told to just like flee immediately from the area. And then it was like, everything's fine. Like we've cleaned it up. It's been isolated. They did like controlled burning of some of these chemicals, to prevent them from like getting into the groundwater, them getting into the soil from, decompress. So the chemicals that we know of, the heavy hitters, the ones that are like, we know that these were there, were vinyl chloride. That's like the main one that I kind of want to just like focus on, but there were a lot more, but it's unclear what they were and in what quantities. But there's a lot of this vinyl chloride, which is used in like industrial processes to make like, to produce like PVC, stuff like that. But the chemical itself is a known carcinogen. So what happened in like the thing of concern is that it was stated by, the rail company, because this is America, was given control over the situation because that's like how we roll here. So they're running the show of their own issue. So like conflict of interest, pretty apparent right from the get-go. But in the way that this stuff like has to work with like the Environmental Protection Agency and all these like partnerships and blah, 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 it's like purposefully convoluted, and authority is like given to this like private company to be able to like be in control of the narrative, essentially, rather than a regulatory body like the EPA being in control of the narrative. So this Norfolk Southern Rail Company has control of the narrative, and they're saying all the things, and they're doing all the things, and they're reporting all the things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the EPA came in, and they observed and documented in accordance with CERCLA, which is like the Superfund law. Jimmy Carter made it back in the day, and it's, the law about these kinds of disasters. And long story short, it's about who is financially responsible and like the pathway to figuring that out and what happened and like making that public knowledge. So that's like basically what CERCLA is. It's the Superfund law. And so when the EPA came in to make all their observations and like check out what was going on, while the narrative was everything is fine now, we did like a controlled burn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What they released in a legal notice that was sent to Norfolk Southern Rail is, a legal document saying what happened, what they observed, and require response, typically within like 24 hours, but it was released overnight not overnight, after business hours on Thursday, so Friday morning. So probably on Monday, the February 13th, tomorrow, as of recording this, we're going to hear about potentially, or it is required that they respond. And while they were saying all this stuff about it's fine and everything is like under control, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's not that bad, basically is what they were saying. The EPA issued this, I'm going to read directly from it, a paragraph. Approximately 20 rail cars were listed as carrying hazardous materials. Cars containing vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, ethyl hexyl acrylate, and ethylene glycol monobutyl ether are known to have been and continue to be released to the air, surface soils, and surface waters. So while they are saying that everything is fine, we have it under control, it's not that bad, the EPA was there documenting what was actually happening. And what was actually happening was that from the incident up to when they released this report, which was on Thursday evening, they had observed that there had been and still was actively happening this chemical being spilled in real time. All these chemicals were being spilled in real time, and that it was not fine. Everything is not fine. This stuff was still happening. So I'm recording this on Sunday morning. So on Friday is when this notice was circulated, because like it came out after business hours. And Thursday, Friday, everything started up again, and this became available. And it goes on to describe there's a section called the explanation of potential liability, and it describes a bunch of more observations. So far what we do know is that the EPA has stated in a legal document that what the rail company has been saying has been happening is not true, and that they're, at the time of the release of this legal document, it was still actively being spilled into the earth, into the water, and into the air because people saw it happening. Federal agents saw it happening, or federal employees saw it happening. So the EPA then goes on to describe the actions that it took under the Superfund law and the program. And like the brief description, I'm just going to read it, is that, so one, they conducted air monitoring around the scene of the incident, the surrounding community, and the residential air monitoring as part of a reoccupancy plan. So they tested the air as part of a plan to get people to be allowed to come back into the area that lived there. Two, they conducted air and water sampling. Three, made the following observations, and this is important stuff. So, A, the materials released during the incident were observed and detected in samples from Sulphur Run, Leslie Run, Bull Creek, North Fork, Little Beaver Creek, and the Ohio River. So this statement of observation also is in contradiction to what was being said by the rail company. They were saying that it was controlled, it did not get into certain places, and that it was restricted to a specific area and specific water bodies and soil and air, et cetera, et cetera. And this documents that it was much beyond what they said that it was. B, materials related to the incident were observed entering storm drains. Okay, so it was being transported as, so it's all this stuff is gas. And to like transport it efficiently, it gets like super condensed to liquid. So it's either like chilled so that it condenses, becomes liquid, or it's like super pressurized so that it condenses and becomes a liquid. And so what this is saying is that these chemicals in liquid form were running off and observed entering storm drains. And so why this is concerning is that it wasn't mentioned and it happened, and that these, like I said, are gases that are condensed into liquid form. And then when they're able to expand either from warming up if they were being cooled or by not having pressure on them because they are in open atmosphere, not a pressurized container anymore, they will become gas again. So if they go into, not theoretically, this is what would happen. If they are entering the into storm drains and getting into the sewer system of this town, which it is what happened, all of the like drainage that connects houses, businesses to the sewer system, as the liquid becomes gas in the sewer system and expands and rises, because that's what gas does, this gas, it can come up from all of these like entry points, like drains, the storm drains themselves, like residential drains in your houses. That is a potential issue. So like indoor air quality can be affected by this because it could be seeping up from drains into people's houses. And that is very concerning. There was a lot of reports of like animal, like pets and stuff being dead when residents who were told to flee immediately coming back and finding like pets dead inside of their houses. So like there's this potential for that being an issue because it was observed entering storm drains. C, multiple rail cars and tankers were observed derailed, breached, and or on fire that include, but are not limited to, the following materials: vinyl chloride, ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, ethyl hexylacrylate, isobutylene, and butyl acrylate. And why this is important is that there are things on here, on this list of just 5 things that were identified that were not mentioned by the rail company. So they made reference to vinyl chloride and I think one other of these chemicals. I forget which one because a lot of them sound similar. But there's more. So they got like busted for that too. D, 5 railcar tankers of vinyl chloride were intentionally breached. The vinyl chloride was diverted to an excavated trench and then burned off. So one of the things that they wanted to do in order to like control the issue was do a controlled burn. So they like dug a burn pit and they guided this chemical of vinyl chloride to go into this burn pit, and then they like blew it up basically to control it. And E, areas of contaminated soil. And well, before I go on to E, the issue with doing that, like it is a strategy. It makes it less bad, I guess, but like the real issue that is, I mean, not the real issue, like another issue that's concerning about this is that when you burn vinyl chloride, you basically are like emitting this, the burnt remnants of this into the atmosphere that becomes acid rain. So like that's all in the atmosphere. Fortunately, they waited for an atmospheric inversion to happen so that when they did do this, it would be able to be lifted out of the area rather than getting trapped, which was like a concern. There was a very specific time frame that they were operating in to do this, so that it would not get trapped in like the lower atmosphere around the area, that it would be able to follow this inversion like up and out. So good and bad, but like acid rain is a byproduct of doing this. When it gets into the atmosphere, it condenses and then it precipitates. Areas in contaminated soil and free liquids were observed and potentially covered and or filled during reconstruction of the rail line, including portions of the trench/burn pit that was used for the open burn of vinyl chloride. So the EPA saw them take contaminated soil and the actual chemical in liquid form, and they observed it being covered up with earth to reconstruct the rail line to get everything moving again. So it is there in whatever quantity. So those are the important things to mention that have happened. So like this thing that I just read from is a legal document. So this is like very, very important because it's not somebody just said something and, it's like making a claim. This is a legal document from the United States government that said the United States government, observed these specific things. These specific things are in contradiction to what the rail company has said, are unearthing the omission of things that the rail company has said, and has shown the downplaying of what happened based on the narrative that the rail company has been putting forward, where it scarcely has been getting any coverage. So it's really, really bad is like the way that I need to express this. It is really, really bad. There are a whole bunch of chemicals. One of the issues is that it has been proven now with this document that what they've said has been released is not the entirety of what has been released. There is a manifest. There is a list of all of the types of chemicals that were on the train, the quantities of all those chemicals that were on a train. So like what they can be and should be doing is releasing that information. What was on the train? How much was on the train? So that there can be like forensic inventorying of what was released. So like how much of it was, how much of these chemicals are still on the train and intact? How much of these chemicals were recovered or mitigated? And you can then estimate how much of these chemicals were lost into the environment. And the amounts of these chemicals is like very significant. There were of what we know, there was a lot of stuff. And a lot of the stuff that we do know about is very dangerous. So now we know that a lot of these chemicals have like entered into the waterways. So like several rivers and creeks, specifically the Ohio River, were documented as having chemicals being introduced into them. And, one of the sad approaches that we have in dealing with like chemical issues and like pollutants, contaminants, toxins entering the environment is like the solution to pollution is dilution. And that if you dilute chemicals down enough that they'll like lose potency and like won't matter. That's, to me, that's like really dumb because like it doesn't go nowhere. It goes, if it's in the water, to the ocean and just accumulates there. Granted, the ocean is very, very large, but a lot of these chemicals just don't like vanish. They just go in the ocean and then they're there. Microplastics is a really good example of that. Microplastics are literally everywhere because they just like don't disappear. They just go into the ocean. And when it happens long enough and in quantities large enough, it's just like, it's everywhere. So like but the issue with these chemicals in particular is that a lot of these chemicals aren't, they can't be diluted by water. They just like float on the top of it and just move through the water system of the area. So it happened in the Ohio River. The Ohio River Basin is very big. It spans, I believe, 9 states and then connects to the Mississippi River, which then connects to the Gulf of Mexico. So there are all of these chemicals that we don't know how much of or what they specifically are, because that's been clouded and shrouded in mystery on purpose. But we know that the company has already been caught lying about what chemicals were present, or at least omitting chemicals that were present that are carcinogens, that are known carcinogens, or are currently being debated as carcinogens, like it's still actively being researched. So really fast about that is that like this is like a really, really good example of why like the United States does this ass backwards, just like chemicals ass backwards. There's like, these chemicals have been like studied, but like not well. Some of them have been studied, not all of them, but some of them have been studied and they haven't been studied well. So like the way that the studies are done is that they're studied in with a specific demographic, adult men in industrial settings. So when we're talking about like the carcinogenic effects of these chemicals that have been documented and identified as being carcinogenic, they've been identified as being carcinogenic on adult males in industrial settings. So it does not include what would happen if a baby breathes this in. It does not include what happens if a teenager breathes this in. It does not include it doesn't include any of that. It doesn't include residential environments. And that's like most of these chemicals, like a really, really big one is hexavalent chromium, not involved in this situation, but hexavalent chromium, the chemical compound that Aaron Brockovich busted PG&E for, that's like part of the issue. Like that chemical is still being debated on its carcinogenicity or its carcinogenic potential, even though we know that it causes cancer. There is still debate on whether it does or not in a legal sense within the EPA. So, like, and a lot of it has to do with this, like, is it being like inhaled? Is it being consumed? Is it, is the person being exposed to or 40 and fit and in good otherwise overall health? So like it's just like an ass backwards approach to being safe and smart and responsible with huge quantities of chemicals being transported around at rapid speeds on aging and dying infrastructure. So like, we just don't do it good. We let these things be put into circulation without having a good idea of like what they are and what they do to us when the inevitable happens. Because, this incident is one of many. This stuff happens all of the time. And I feel like that's something that should be taken away from this whole conversation, and why I think people need to get much more informed and involved in this incident in particular. Because even though this is happening in real time, like right now, what also is happening in real time is that there's a spill in Maui and Hawaii of fuel from the Army. And there's like a whole bunch of stuff going on over there. There was something happened not too long ago in Philadelphia that you probably didn't even hear about. But like these types of incidences happen all of the time. And, every few days in the United States. So like, this is a good opportunity for people to get involved in as far as getting informed on how all this stuff works and how it doesn't work, and it's kind of broken. But back to kind of like the issue at hand. So we know that the rail company, Norfolk Southern, was lying about many, many things, and they legit buried a bunch of it and rebuilt the tracks over the top of it and got everything out of there. And that rail line is like active again. So like, what do we do? The company that is the offender has hired like collected data by hiring like the testing firm to like start collecting data. They're relying on citizen science. Like they gave people these cards and like sensors to be able to test the amount of blanket volatile organic compounds in the air in their homes. And the stuff that they gave people is like bad. For lack of better terms, it's just bad. They gave them these things that have like no precision. It just measures like the lowest measurement that can be recorded is like less than 0.1. So like 100 parts per million, I believe. I forget like the specific measurement that they have, that the lowest measure. But the point is that like there's a huge variable, like these chemicals, like in the air, in the water, etc. Like the parts per billion are like really, really small for them to be very, very dangerous. So like having this like blanket, like less than 0.01 measurement is like ultimately meaningless, and it also doesn't measure any specific chemical. It just measures generally the amount of volatile organic compounds that are in the air, which, like, if you follow the ridiculousness that is the news, you will know that your gas stove releases volatile organic compounds into your indoor environment. If you bought a rug recently or bought new furniture recently and it's degassing, it has volatile organic compounds in it that are released into the air. Like you can smell it. Like when you open, like, how do I say? Like when you open, let's say like a rug that's been like wrapped in like a plastic and you first open it and it smells. That's the stuff. That's like the gas, the gas. That's the stuff that's in it that is releasing the gas that is the volatile organic compound. So like it's in a ton of stuff that's already in your house. So like you're not measuring anything with like precision. You're not measuring any specific chemical in general. And indoor air quality is more likely than not in America already bad enough to like, it's like, how do I say? It's like a way to start creating, in my opinion, a way to start creating deniability that like it couldn't have been this because like there's already volatile organic compounds like in your house, but it's also like in everyone's houses, but they're not collecting anything specific. There's no precision. There's no accuracy. It's just like there's stuff here or there isn't, but like there is stuff there always everywhere. So like they gave out all these kits. They are the ones who hired the company that came and did like testing, et cetera, et cetera. So like what can be done in Buffalo, in New York? There's like a really, really good example of what happens when, we have this like terrible system of how all this stuff happens. But what happens when people are informed enough to know how to maneuver the system and how to collect information in order to navigate the system and create accountability. So like in Buffalo, a similar thing happened where like a company polluted the environment and people were able to and started to measure and test for all those chemicals and had all of the evidence needed in order to retaliate and like shut that company down, essentially. So like what needs to happen, and like a lot of times the like throw money at it thing is like what wants to happen, which another thing. The rail company offered like a settlement to the town. So there's like 5,000 people that live in this town. They offered like this asinine amount of money to be like, oh, here you go for all the pain and suffering. $25,000, $5 per person that lives in the town. What? Like, that's like worse than not doing anything. It's like if you've worked in a restaurant when, like someone has a big bill and they tip you like $1, it's like you giving $1 is worse than giving no money at all, because like it just shows that you knew you should have tipped, other that you know that you're supposed to, and like you're just not doing it. So like they are like acknowledging with this $25,000, are acknowledging that a thing has happened that has caused damage, but like not enough that it's going to do anything. And again, it's one of those like creating a scenario that like will potentially absolve them in the future. Because if the town takes this $5 per person, you've accepted compensation for what happened. So like, here's the stuff that I have to say about all of this. I understand that like the world is terrible when it comes to like us regular people and like money. So I understand that like more likely than not, there is going to be a want or desire to accept some sort of money, because it's money. It's money, and like people are desperate, and this amount of money is predatory. It's like being dangled in front of people's faces during a time of crisis, in an area that is already hard up. It's like it's America. And so like that's gonna happen. And then there's like the healthcare issue. Like, if there's no way to access it, like, I get that people might not do that, but like where it can happen, people should not take the money. Go, and if you experience any sort of like health issues, respiratory or otherwise, go to a doctor and like start documenting all this stuff of like what's going on, to create to start collecting information about what happened and like the aftermath and the impact on people. So like that is something that should happen. What else should happen is that people should, where they can, start testing, getting actual, not bullshit testing equipment, and test for, at least for now, the specific chemicals that we know were there or involved. And then, there's all the ones that we don't know about, which there probably are because they already got caught lying about how many chemicals were involved. So testing, and then observations. So like if you're walking around in the area and like, like I said, like, yes, the immediate area is like East Palestine and like the surrounding area, but the watershed is like enormous. So like downstream, the Ohio River is like Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, other towns, other cities, other places that like if you see a weird thing, like every fish in this part of the river is dead, document those things. I'm gonna find links, etc., and like put them in the description of this, because I've seen people starting to like put together spreadsheets and like Google Forms to be able to like submit observations and like enter your like measurements of data, etc., and like provide like video and photo documentation of all of this stuff to like verify everything. So, but like like this just happened in the past several days, and it is, like the water is a moving. So it's important for, I think, a lot of activity in, even if it's just in like making observations and like reporting them. Like, I was in this town and walking across this bridge and saw like a bunch of dead animals. That's important. We should know that it should be like reported, so that like the extent of like that kind of an observation can lead to then testing in that area of like what happened and finding out if it's the same stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, so like tying it all together, I guess, the incident with this train derailing in East Palestine in Ohio is bad. The potential for a huge, like the Ohio River is huge. The Ohio River Basin is huge, and it runs through 9 states. I believe it's 9 states before it then connects with the Mississippi River, and then connects and then runs through several more states before it goes to the Gulf of Mexico, which then is adjoining several more states and countries. So like the impact is, and remember, it doesn't dilute; it just floats on the top, and is easily transmissible. It can move very easily along the top of water and do a lot of damage as it continues to become gas. So it's a big deal as far as like what actually happened. It's also a big deal that because of the way that all of this quote regulation happens, in that it doesn't, it's like it's inevitable that these spills are going to happen, and that more likely than not, the chemicals that are spilling, like, we probably don't even really know that much about, because it's not required. You're allowed to just like introduce new chemicals into production and like to be transported around without them really being studied. It's like the way that we do it here. The onus of responsibility is on outside entities to like do the testing and do the research and then submit it to the EPA to then be considered for categorization. It's just insane. So it was really bad. The system is, terrible. The EPA, in what like limited authority and like regulation that they have, was able to observe enough to prove that the rail company was lying several times about several things. What was involved, the extent of how it was involved, the purposeful burying of chemicals in order to like rebuild the track and get it profitable again near immediately. Like in my opinion, the only real effort was the controlled burn happening during an atmospheric inversion. That's like the only like real effort that I can attribute that happened, that they did a good thing. That was a decent play, but everything else is terrible. Terrible, unethical, and, the way that these things work. So, like, the best thing that everybody can do is get familiar with how this stuff works. And that way, when it happens close to where you are equipped with the knowledge of how everything works so that you can operate within the system to then create the accountability. Because that's like essentially what's happening, is like we're abandoned to be the ones to like create the accountability. So like, it's awful. I'm really, really happy that it wasn't worse than it is as far as like human casualty. But like, it was really, really bad, and it still is really, really bad. This is like Love Canal, upstate New York bad. So I'm gonna leave in like the description of this, the show notes for this episode, links to a bunch of different resources, as well as links to places where you can report and record observations and any measurements that anybody can take to start like centralizing some citizen science and start collecting data to begin some sort of accountability. So I think I'm gonna leave it there. There's way more that I didn't even get into, like how that whole thing with the railroad union that Congress shot down, and that Pete Buttigieg was like, no, and Joe Biden were like, no striking, go back to work with literally nothing. They literally said that this was going to happen because this shit always happens, like not that long ago. So like, I didn't even get any of that stuff, but like specifically the environment stuff and the chemical stuff, like it's bad. If you can get involved in learning all this stuff, the more knowledgeable people are about this stuff, and how to like navigate it and how to operate within it, like the better we'll be at being able to create that public pressure for actual change. So yeah, look in the show notes for all the links to the sources, resources, and places that you can report. And yeah, good luck, everybody. Thanks for listening.